This is Bonjour Hi, the People of the Pocketbook edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here in the studio with Alana Zakon in Montreal and David Sklar in Calgary. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, it's back to school, and as our thoughts go to Jewish education, we decide to ponder the perennial predicaments about Jewish schooling. We've convened a panel, and we ask the big questions. But first, Alana, David, I am done back to school shopping. The clothes are bought, the uniforms are done, the stationery, the ridiculous amounts of like liquid paper and erasers and 100 pencils per kid or some ridiculous thing. It's done, right? Do you remember what it was like on the other side of that, like buying all this stuff?
I got really, really excited about my pencil case. That was a big thing because going to a school that has a uniform, you have very little independence in terms of the way that you can kind of, show your personality. So it was like, what are my shoes? What is my pencil case? What kind of pencils am I going to have? Am I going to have lead pencils? Am I going to have regular pencils? Am I going to have those little erasers that stick on the top of them? I was a huge school nerd. I actually would...
Apparently.
By the time that like camp ended, I was excited to go back to school. Like when we had like breaks, I was like ready to get back. I loved to learn. I really loved all the like having my desk and organizing it. I was very, very disorganized though when I was in elementary school. That was something that I remember in grade 5 or 6. They said, okay, as you're going to go into high school, what are the qualities you want to work on? And mine was I need to get more organized because my papers would be everywhere. And I did work on it, and now I'm extremely organized.
Alana, I think I had the opposite experience of you, where I started off being very orderly in grade 7. I remember the most exciting thing I was going to buy were the binders. Every year I had to get like a fresh new set of 6 or 7 or 8 binders for each individual class. And as the years progressed up to grade 10 and 11, they all just went by the wayside, and I was just combining Hebrew class with Jewish history class with even French class all into one binder, and my papers went flying everywhere.
I'm disorganized too.
Okay.
I'm there. I like buying stuff.
Yeah.
I liked picking which binder was special and important. I cared more about my shoes. Not really at the time. I think we were very strict about what.
And you still do to this day.
I still do to this day.
He's wearing pretty cool shoes today.
That is true. Yeah. So, but I'm glad that's over. Alana's wishing it was happening again. So next year, Alana, you're in charge of my kids' back to school shopping.
Okay, let's do it.
Done. Speaking of back to school shopping, if you do want some jewelry for back to school, you should go to Atelier Lou. Let's hear from our sponsor, and then let's hear our big panel.
Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Montreal, Quebec. Atelier Lou specializes in watches and custom-designed jewelry along with a curated selection of designer jewelry. Visit us online or in person, and Eric Goldberg will help make your jewelry dreams come true. Atelier Lou is offering a promo code for all Bonjour High listeners using BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
So we were batting ideas around for a back-to-school episode in our CJN virtual newsroom, as one does. And at some point, the conversation got interesting enough that we decided, you know what, let's put a pin in this and ask the people that are on here to come on and actually discuss this ideas that we were talking about with regards to day schools actually on the show itself, instead of getting an expert like a head of school or getting kids themselves, getting an outside expert, which, there's usefulness to that. But what I really liked about this was that we were getting a sort of on the ground report from people who were sending their kids or who had day school experience. And, we have experiences, we have opinions. And so I wanted to convene this panel of CJN journalists to be able to discuss this. So first, who we have with us today is Lila Sarick, who is the news editor of the CJN, Michael Fraiman, who is the executive producer of the CJN podcasts, and Yoni Goldstein, our CEO and editor-in-chief, who is a no stranger to the program itself. So welcome all to Bonjour Chai.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
And why don't we start with you, Lila, who can tell us what's your experience been? Did you go to day school? Did you send your kids to day school?
I did not go to day school. I have 3 growing kids who all went to day school. I would say that you don't need to be an involved Jew to go to day school. Myself and my siblings did not go to day school, and my sister and brother were presidents of their synagogues, very involved in Jewish communal life. So I would say that at the outset. I sent my three to a variety of day schools in Toronto and in the United States because I wanted them as an adult. I think it's very hard to become Jewishly literate, to speak Hebrew, to know Talmud, to have a broad grasp of Jewish history. Those are very hard skills to pick to daven effectively. Those are very hard skills I found to pick up as an adult, and very easy skills to pick up as a child in school. And so that was really one of my motivations for sending my kids to day school.
Excellent. Michael, you're welcome finally to hear. Glad to hopefully hear your voice on this show instead of just being behind the scenes.
Yes, long time listeners will have heard my voice or heard my name rather in the credits for the past year. Those of us on the call can see that I am holding my less than 2-year-old son. I do not plan on sending him to day school, partly because we live in Niagara Falls and I wouldn't be able to if I wanted to. But it's also not something that's that important to me because I went to day school myself and I did not enjoy the experience at all. I didn't have any friends. I didn't really connect with it. And I just found like the whole thing was kind of not my scene. So it wasn't that hard of a decision to move from Toronto to Niagara Falls and sort of cut off that aspect of it.
Interesting. Okay. Yoni, what's your experience been with day school?
I went to day school pretty much all the way through. I went to one Jewish elementary school through grade 4, and then I switched to another one, graduated from grade 8. Then I went to an all-boys yeshiva high school for all of high school. And then I even did a year and a half at a yeshiva in Israel after that. My kids do not go to day school. They go to French immersion public school. They also go to supplementary Jewish education a couple of days a week, and that's been ongoing through COVID on Zoom, but I'm really looking forward to it being back in session in a month or so. That's a couple of days a week, focused mostly on Hebrew and like Parsha and Torah stuff. And then we kind of try and fill in some of the gaps at home. And I could get into some of the reasons why we made that decision later on, but that's sort of my day school history.
David?
I grew up in Montreal and I went for 11 years of Jewish day school. Started with Solomon Schechter and then went to Bialik. And I think we've talked a lot on the show about a lot of the criticisms of certain things that have happened in day school. But I do remember a lot. Growing up, I had a learning disability and I had a lot of support in the school system. And I can't say it's specifically because it was a Jewish day school, but they were able to take me out of the room and give me a lot of support with support teachers, everything that was going around. And I think if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to succeed for the rest of my life. I think as we've talked, a lot growing up into the high school experience, many people did not take Yiddish or Hebrew seriously, but I love Jewish history. I am so happy that I had that. If I hadn't gone to a Jewish day school, I don't think I would know so much about our history, which I truly appreciate and love. And I think that's the biggest benefit that I got out of those school systems. I can't necessarily speak for learning Hebrew. My Hebrew is not great. It probably still remains at a grade 1, grade 2 level, even after spending 6 months in Israel. But I think there are so many things, intangible things, that you really cannot put a cost or a number to that I got out of Jewish day school.
Okay. And Alana?
I went to Jewish school for literally my entire life until I graduated high school, all in the same building from playful parenting in the basement of my synagogue, Beth Tikva in Dollard, to the preschool in the building, the kindergarten, the elementary school, and then I went to Herzliya High School in Saint Laurent back when they had 2 branches. I had a very positive experience, and it's interesting having spent most of the past year in Toronto and listening to the complaints of a lot of my friends who went through the Toronto system, it actually made me realize how good the education was that I had at HFS and Herzliya, especially on the Hebrew. front. It seems like a lot of my friends who studied Hebrew in other schools, especially out of Montreal, they barely can speak. And even though my Hebrew is quite rusty, when I was still using it actively, I was completely fluent. And I don't think that the culture in my high school was that the Jewish studies and the Hebrew classes were kind of uncool. It actually was a mark of success if you were in the highest group for those classes. And people took it quite seriously in a way that was very engaged.
Yeah. So I went to Jewish day school. I went to a yeshiva, an all-boys yeshiva from nursery through grade 11. We only have grade 11 in Montreal. I went to a yeshiva for a year afterwards. And then I went and I taught in Jewish day schools. I taught at Herzliya in Saint Laurent, same school that you were at. I taught in the U.S. Then I, at some point, decided I didn't want. I was starting to teach adults, and that I didn't want to have to deal with homework. So that's a different discussion. So I think we have a wide variety of points of view here. But what I find most interesting about this wide variety is that everybody seems to think that there's a different definition of why it's worthwhile and what you get or you're supposed to get out of Jewish day school. And so I think that's, to me, the first question that I want to be able to define is, how do we identify what success looks like when we're looking at day school? Is it about social aspects, like you're involved as a parent with other Jews, you're involved as a student with other Jews? Is it, that networking effect of being within the Jewish community, which of course comes with a cost of isolation from the larger society sometimes? Is it about Jewish knowledge? Is it about the Yiddish, about the Jewish history, about the language, about studying Talmud, about having all of these facts? Or is it about training us to become great members of, the Jewish community, big leaders, et cetera, et cetera? So, and I think that everybody here seems to have something very, very different. So who wants to open it up for us? And I'm sure somebody here has a very good definition of what they think is success for the Jewish community. Michael.
Just to clarify something, as the guy who hates day school the most here, I want to clarify that the education, just following up on what Alana said, the education I got was so good. When I went to grade 9 public school, I literally was like so far ahead of everyone else. I was reading the same book in grade 9 that I read in grade 8 in English class, to the point that the teacher had to give me another book to read, like to do privately. Like, I went to Bialik Hebrew Day School. Kudos to them for like helping me coast through grade 9 with very little effort and no studying necessary. And I still got whatever 80s and 90s. So thank you. That said, if we're talking about success on a Jewish level, I think it's different. Obviously, I worked for the Canadian Jewish News, so even though I resented my years at day school, it had some kind of effect. And it instilled in me some kind of Jewish identity in life, which I do want to carry on to my own son. But I don't feel like I need to do it in that kind of rigid classroom way. I feel like I have, I can decide, okay, we don't need to go full Talmud, but like the songs and the holidays and the whatever, stuff like that, some Hebrew words, that we will do. So for me, I think if it's, even though I speak disparagingly of it, it's hard to say it wasn't successful for me.
From a knowledge perspective.
Well, and the Jewish one, frankly, because again, I worked for the CJN, which I probably would not if I didn't go to Bialik Hebrew Day School.
Yeah, just to follow up on a couple of things that Michael was talking about, and I agree with a lot of them. For me, like the more I think about it, as my kids get older, they're 8 and 7 now, and they've been in the public school system for, well, my oldest one is going into grade 4 this year. So the more I think about it, like the fact that I went to day school and that my wife went to less day school than I did, but went to it in parts of elementary school, like has sort of given us the educational and cultural knowledge and background and sort of like, I don't know, kishkas that it's made it a little bit easier to send our kids to what we think is like maybe giving them a little bit of a broader view of society. But like, that's because we're pretty confident that we can carry on, the Jewish aspects of life that we feel really strongly about. So like, yeah, like day school succeeded, ditto also working at the CJN. So it's important to me. I think, what I view as my Judaism has changed dramatically since I was in the day school system. but the ingrained nature of wanting to do Jewish things and be involved in Jewish movements, that hasn't really changed at all. And I think that is that's certainly a result of having that kind of education.
Both of you are making me think of how it all kind of comes back to the home. Because if I think about the people I knew growing up, if they were doing absolutely nothing at home, then their perspective on what we were learning at school seemed really pointless. And it sounds to me, in a way, Yoni, you're saying, well, me and my partner went through the system, so we can send our kids to the public school. But if you hadn't, then maybe it would be a different situation. So to me, it's kind of a two-pronged thing. You need to have some kind of connection outside of the school and outside of the institution in order for there to be a drive to learn and to continue your Judaism. But then if you don't have that foundation, kind of what Lila was saying before resonated with me, is I'm realizing how convenient it is, the fact that I went through the system and have this breadth of knowledge that the people that I know that went to public school, if they didn't have it in the home, they're just not getting it.
I totally agree with that. I knew people growing up who did sort of the same thing that we do now with our kids, and they turned out to be super committed religious kids, and like involved in Jewish projects professionally. So like I knew that it could be done from seeing some models as a kid. But you're right, it does come down to what's happening at the home in terms of weighing the value of the Jewish education. And like for sure, like it's a pretty big schlep for me to go to shul on Shabbat morning, and it was an extra big schlep when I had to push two kids in a stroller. But yeah, I think that the fact that they're not going to day school every day makes me more inclined to want to take them to shul as often as possible. And the same way that effort and time and money goes into providing a child with a day school experience, like that home experience also requires effort and time and money as well. So like that is like you're saying, a really, really key part of it, and not that different, at least in the early years of education in my mind.
Okay, so what I'm curious about really is, why do so many people go through the Jewish day school public system and then almost completely leave it? Why is it that you've been instilled with these values for 6 or 11 years, and then as soon as you graduate, go off to CEGEP or university, many people want nothing to do with it? They sort of say, I am done. I won't touch it.
Because it's full of bros who only care about sports, and nerds like me didn't have any friends and we couldn't wait to get out.
I can speak to that a bit. I've gone through like a huge transformation of the way that I think about it. I went through many years of really feeling isolated throughout most of my, especially elementary school. I had different friends pretty much every year. I was that weird artsy kid who sang musical theater. And in high school, I got lucky that I met people like mid-high school, what would have basically been middle school if I lived outside of Quebec. I finally found some people that I really connected with who are still my friends today. But for a while, I kind of looked back at those years and thought I was so isolated. I didn't have friends that had the same interests as me because my school is so small.
It's not diverse. Sorry, it's not a diverse environment at all.
Michael and Alana, is that just you? Is it like, okay, if you were more of the nerdy or artistic kids and you end up hosting and running podcasts, the other ones, do they have a time where they sort of said, these were possibly the best years of my life, it instilled such important values into me, and they're so connected to the community?
Yeah.
Well,
I actually think that the people that had really strong friendships I see people on Facebook who only went to Jewish elementary school, and they're still best friends with the people that they went to the Jewish elementary schools with, because they had those groups and those cliques, and even high school friends. I feel like, to me, the difference is that, I mean, most of the people I went to school with were pretty secular compared to the way that I was. And that was their social life. And so when they all went off to Dawson College, and then McGill, they were going to Hillel, and they actually retained those connections more than I did. And for me, I think it took the many years of being pretty uninvolved in the community, where most of my friends were not Jewish and artists, to realize how much I actually appreciated the fact that I went to day school. But that took me close to 10 years to actually realize that the roots that I had brought me back because they were so ingrained, and that the education I had was so good, and that even though I don't have as many friends from my day school experience, that the content that I was learning was eventually what made me want to kind of come back and realize the good that came with being in a bubble, and also wanting to expand it. And that's kind of what I wanted to hear a bit more about from, I guess, everyone here, because I'm hearing a few people bring up things about wanting to expand their kids' knowledge of what's out there beyond the community. And I totally relate to that. But how can we do both? How can we have that strong education, maybe even in a day school, but then also open your kids' minds to the fact that there are other people and other cultures out there, and that diversity?
I think like that's the question in my mind. Like here's an example, and this goes back to what we were talking before about going to university, which is a big eye opener for anybody who's been in sort of a cloistered Jewish environment, especially if it's like an all boys and an Orthodox environment, all the more so. It's a huge eye opener.
Did you have that experience, Yoni, where you started showing up at university in like dress pants and like a button down shirt, and everybody was like, which wedding are you going to? And you're like, no, that's just how I dress. 'Cause that's what I've been taught to dress
No,
like.
I had what's it called? Uniform. We had a uniform in high school, and I hated it so much that like the day I was allowed to wear jeans to anything educational, I was like totally into that. I used to get in trouble like literally every day in high school for not having my shirt tucked in, and I later found out that it was because my mother told the principal to stay on my case to have my shirt tucked in all the time. So anyways, little sideways there, but so a big eye opener when you get to university. Look, my biggest personal regret from day school is that I had no idea until I got to university, by which point it was pretty well too late, that one could make a career in the music industry. That it didn't mean unless somebody figured out that you were a virtuoso pianist at age 13 or whatever, became a rock star, you could actually work in the music industry if that was your love. And you could find ways to do that. You could go to study that in school. You could work in a studio, or maybe you could become a famous guitarist in a touring band. I had no idea of any of that when I was in day school or Jewish high school. Music programs consisted of like singing in a choir. That was it.
But Yoni, if you did know that, then maybe you wouldn't be our fearless leader today. And I think we're in a better place for it.
Well, I appreciate that. And look, I don't regret the way my life turned out, but it's like no secret to me that music is probably my first love. And that was not something that was considered important at an educational level in the Jewish schools that I went to. So to answer Ilana's question, I don't know. I mean, I think you kind of need bigger pools of students, actually, in order to offer programs like that. Like I went to a school where I think at the time in my high school, there were maybe 80 kids. My graduating class had 10 kids in it, myself included. There was going to be no economic way that they could offer any sort of real musical programming. They were focused on producing good Jews and kids who would get into the university of their choice. And that succeeded. But at the same time, I think, I'm sure I wasn't the only one who felt that when they got to university, we're like, wow, I could study things that I'm actually passionate and interested about, and I don't, and there are choices that I can make. Like, this is up to me now. Needless to say, I didn't choose a lot of Jewish studies courses. I think I did one, and that was it. I want to do.
I want to
other
throw
stuff.
it back to Lila. What are your thoughts on all the things that we've been talking about right now?
All the things. My biggest I would say my biggest problem with the day school system, as I've seen it, especially in Toronto, is a real trend towards homogeneity, so a lack of diversity, and that leads to a real trend to mediocrity. I don't think my kids' academic education was stellar. I think that kids who are academically gifted or not neurotypical don't thrive in day school, and day schools don't make an effort to capture kids who are not kind of, fitting into pegs. I had a high school teacher tell me that the high school was great for kids who were going to do business, law, and medicine. And of course, that's most of the alumni, and that's what most of the alumni parents want for their own children. And if you have kids who are, so I would say that the lack of diversity, and I think it comes across the school in many, many ways. It doesn't address kids who are on any end of any academic spectrum. I think even community schools tend to the orthodox, and they're often not very welcoming to anything that's non-orthodox, although the majority of children there may well not be orthodox. I think there's no rigor in looking at Israel, even today. I think there's no rigor in looking at spirituality, as with kind of just saying, oh yeah, like orthodoxy is our default position. There's not a lot of diversity in terms of racially, in terms of they're trying very hard to do it with economics, but they're way behind the eight ball on getting diverse economic populations into school and making those kids feel truly welcome in our schools. And I think that tends to lead to this kind of complacency and homogeneity that doesn't really serve anyone well. And I think all of us on this call, because none of us are, we didn't go to Western and study business, right? May account for perhaps why none of us really felt perhaps that we were a great fit in day schools, or our children are a great fit in day schools, because the day school's not really looking at kids. And artistic too. I see that the schools have started to change, and some schools are way better at this than others. Sometimes all it takes is one fabulous teacher to turn around a kid's experience, but it's kind of risky to say, I'm really hoping my kid gets that teacher who sees that artistic spark in my kid and encourages it. On the other hand, and so that's probably my biggest single complaint about the day school system, is that kind of trend towards mediocrity and complacency. On the other hand, the fact that most of the folks who are on this call in their 20s and went to day school and say they're not engaged, I think that speaks more to the community that you are graduating into, that has a real dearth of opportunities for people who aren't kind of married to and have a kid in preschool. I think so I don't know that it's necessarily the day school. I think it's more a reflection of the community that we're living in. So I'm not quite prepared to give that black mark. I'll give many black marks to day school, but I'm not quite prepared to give that one to the day school system. And I think it speaks more to our larger communal institutions that really struggle to find a place for people who aren't giving to Federation and putting their kids into playful parenting yet, and may never do that, So that's my take on it.
So what you're leading to,
I feel like everyone here on this chat right now is from the Breakfast Club and feeling all the outcasts.
Sure. I think that there's something interesting in what Lila's saying, and we've been talking a lot about the things which day school does well, which is identity and society, right? That in that sense, it gives you this group of friends that you don't necessarily walk away from, even if you walk away from Jewish practice, and it gives you that community and it gives you all this stuff. And I don't think there's an easy answer to this, but supposing your child is neurodiverse and you're faced with a mediocre Jewish school system, but to you, the important thing is to make sure that your child is in a Jewish social setting, right? Knowing that we're going to supplement it with non-Jews around in various other ways, right? Are we willing to accept mediocrity in order for that piece of it to be fulfilled, right? We just have the other question also. Are we willing to embrace mediocrity of academia, right, in order to make sure that we have a double, or in Quebec, a triple curriculum of English, French, and Hebrew?
Well, I think that depends on the school too. There are some schools, like, I actually think that my education was really good. And the
Sure.
mediocrity that I relate to is more what Lila was talking about that the oh my God, I can't-
Homogeneity.
thank you. Blah, blah, blah. That everyone kind of was the same. Like, I literally remember in grade 7 thinking, if I don't conform to fitting in, I am going to be bullied for the rest of my years at school. And I just decided to, wear the shoes that everyone was wearing so that I would fit in because I was having a miserable time.
But are we willing, like, is it a value to be able to say we're going to place that value over the idea that there might be some mediocrity in whatever it is that we care about, in order that our kids are socialized in a Jewish environment, or that we continue this idea of a community being a community? Is that, at what point are we willing to take that value and to uphold that?
Well, I mean, you're basically putting up like the value of like a social education versus like the rigors of whatever, a formal education. There is obviously value to it, and people who are not on this call who will tell you that they hated day school as much, if not more, than any of us here, will also be the first to tell you that they're sending their kids to the same place where they went. There's a reason for that.
I'm on that call.
There's a reason for
I'm
that.
doing that. I didn't like my yeshiva.
Yeah, people like over the years, people when we talk to people about education, they'll say like, oh, I wish I had the guts to do that, but my parents would kill me or whatever. And I hear that, I get that, and that sort of plays into the question that you're talking about. So yeah, there is a perceived social value for it. I think it increases the more that you're talking about Orthodox schooling, where that social value is at least as important as some of the educational values. So there are Haredi schools in Toronto and Montreal. There are tons of them and tons of kids going to them. And the social values that they're going to gain out of that are going to be directly put to use for the entirety of their lives in like 99% of the cases. And in that situation, there is a value. It is preparing you for a type of life. It comes down to a point where you realize that that's what the nature of it is, and you decide how you want to react to that. I think you can put it up against any value. Like, is being part of a community, is it better to send your kids to swimming lessons in a Jewish program than or whatever at the JCC than at the local place? Well, yeah, they're going to hang out with Jewish kids and see that Jewish kids swim more likely than if they went to some other place. Is that more valuable than the 10 minutes more you have to drive there, or the fact that you're not going to know anybody, the other parents who are watching your kids, and that's going to affect your Jewish experience of watching your kids' swimming lesson? It's pretty complicated. So, people have to make their decisions. And it's obviously complicated too for the people who say, God, I hated day school, but I'm definitely sending my kids there too. It's not a cop-out answer. That's a complicated answer that requires like a level of maturity to make that decision.
I've heard a lot of people who grew up as the only Jew in their grade at public school in the middle of rural BC or some small town in Ontario, that actually strengthened their identity, because as the only Jew, they felt like they had to, stand up for their people and against anti-Semitism, and that's what defined their experience. But I feel like there's probably also the other side of it, where people felt they had to hide their identity because of the anti-Semitism or feeling like they didn't fit in. And I'm curious, I guess for any of you, what experiences that you've heard, either maybe Yoni from your kids going through the public system, do you feel that in 2022, kids' identities are being strengthened more by being out of the system and needing to stand up for it, or being in the system and having that social community?
Okay, well, in my case, the public school where my kids go, there's tons of Jewish kids, including in their classes. The park where all the kids play on the weekend, like you could have a minion there if someone really needed one. So there are Jewish things around. My kids will, like, when it's the holidays, and they'll do their show and tells about Jewish things, and they do try and integrate, like, even, they'll throw in like a thing or two about Hanukkah around Christmas time, which I appreciate, I suppose. But it's also different because, like, their Hebrew school is in their after school supplementary Hebrew school is in the exact same school where they go. So that has, I think, probably a positive effect. I think, like, it couldn't really be a better situation in that way for me.
Alana just mentioned small towns, and I just want to briefly throw to an episode of Yehupitzville, another CJN podcast about Jews in small communities. The episode that we just produced this week actually discusses that, like, directly. It's an interview with Rabbi Rachel Isaacs, who is the head of a place called the Center for Small Town Jewish Life in Maine. It's like a small college, and she talks about how so many Jews that she meets, like in big cities, machers or just community leaders, grew up in small towns, and they credit growing up in small towns with the strength of their Jewish identity. They say, like, it, regardless, Alana, of whether it made them proud or made them hide, it became so ingrained within them that they became the community leaders who they were. So I do think that there's value to being forced in that situation, because otherwise, going back to the homogeneity argument, when you're inundated with something 24/7,
case in point is me, right? I found I had to rediscover my Judaism only when I came out to Calgary. It always felt like it was just around me. I didn't have to do anything to be Jewish if I was in Montreal.
So I lived for 7 years in a mid-sized town, a city in the United States, where there was one day school that went up to grade 8, and my kids' classes were small. Like, their graduating classes would have been 5, 6, 7 kids if we were very, very lucky. And the day school there played a really different role. And the day school there was really the heart of the community. Our friends, our social life, my kids' friends, everything. The day school played a very outsized role in keeping a community together. And I said that at that point, I was living in a good-sized city with about 6,000 Jews total. And I said that I wouldn't move ever to a community that wasn't able to put a day school, and the academics were excellent. It was kind of the philosophy was fairly orthodox, although most of the kids weren't orthodox. But the academics were really outstanding. And I said I would never move to a community that couldn't get it together to have a day school, because I think it's very reflective of a community's values. And if a community can't get it together to put together a really top-notch day school, it's not a place that I could ever see raising my children. And definitely they had a very different point of view, coming from a small day school that was the heart of a community to a place in Toronto where day school's taken for granted, is not the heart of the community. If any of our day schools failed, and we've seen day schools fail in Toronto at an astonishing high rate, you move, you go somewhere else. It's no one's crying terribly. And I think so I think that, yes, you have to think about what day school means, not just in our big cities, but in our smaller places where it really shapes people's identities to a huge amount.
I'd like to talk about money right now. One thing we haven't brought up is just how expensive it is to send your kids to Jewish day school, whether it's for 6 years or for 12 years. What happens if you are a family raising a kid in Toronto, where you can barely afford a house or rent? How do you make that choice? Are there areas that a young Jewish family can access if they're seeking support, because they say, hey, Jewish day school is really important to us, but there's no way we can even afford it?
Yeah, I had a colleague once who said that if you have 2 kids in Jewish day school, it's like buying a Lexus every year and pushing it off a cliff. Just from a cost perspective. I'm
hoping they're getting something out of it other than rubble.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's clearly, the point. But look, the cost is a fortune. Quebec is way cheaper than other places, and yet it's still very expensive. I can't figure out how we pay so much every year, and yet Catholic schooling in the States, where it's all private, is like $3,000, $5,000 for a private school because the Catholic Church manages to like figure out how to pay for this.
There
in
are
a
way
way
more Catholics than there are Jews. Let's
Sure.
just remember that.
But there's also way more Catholics in Catholic school. Right? My response to that immediately, and I know it's more complicated than this, is there's got to be a way to figure out how to pay for school using some sort of a communal tax, whether it's through synagogue memberships or federation donations, that X number of dollars goes to pay for day schools across the board so that it's a public good, whether or not you are part of your children go to a day school or not. Because if you're an active member of the Jewish community, your kids are benefiting from you are benefiting from Jewish day school, regardless of whether you have children or not. You should be paying for that the same way that we pay for school taxes, even if we don't have kids in school anymore, or if we don't have kids at all.
But is that really fair to families or people who are involved in the community and sort of say, I'm never going to have kids, I don't have kids, why should I have to pay this so-called like Jewish tax?
Yes, that's my point, because you're still benefiting from Jewish day school. If Jewish day schools are the things that produce Jewish leaders, which create the federations or staff the federations or the Canadian Jewish Newses or the whatever other Jewish organizations that you benefit from, then you should be paying for that in the long term, because just because you don't want your kids to be a leader doesn't mean that you're not taking advantage. Like I said, it's about active membership in the community. If you actively are part of the community, you are benefiting from day schools, regardless of whether you have children in school or not.
Taxing people based on what's good for society and not them individually doesn't usually go well.
Yeah, I would pay that tax and still not send my kids to day school. That would sort of be my reaction to it. Look, like I think do you need to make financial sacrifices to send your kids to day school unless you're extremely wealthy or you come from a family with a lot of wealth? Yeah, for sure. And looking back, I can see that my parents made some of those sacrifices along the way and took fewer trips and had not as nice cars to drive off the cliff every year. And that was their value. That was what they chose to spend their money on. I don't really see that as being that different than somebody who decides that, their value is collecting antique instruments or something. It's what you decide to value with your money. I do think that my wife has been working on this project for a couple of years, dealing specifically with school subsidies and families and the affordability issue for Jewish families here in Toronto. And I can tell you that there's never been more subsidies available to people who are having trouble paying. And I'm pretty sure there's never been more people who are having trouble paying just based on the economy we have and the cost of these schools. And maybe it requires really big thinking for down the line. But in the meantime, the subsidies are there. Now, what the subsidies being there doesn't necessarily undo the stigma attached to people who are accepting the subsidies, whether they're real or perceived stigmas. And maybe that's sort of the next generation of the affordability of fixing the affordability issue is cutting that divide between people who are paying full fare and people who are paying subsidies and are making it obvious, just because of the clothes they wear to school every day. There are more things that can be done there. But in terms of the cost, I think everybody at a leadership level has realized that it is actually a major issue. And they are trying to do things about it. There's more money than ever for people who want to send their kids to day school and don't think they can afford it. The reality is that at this point, they probably can.
I also think that we need much more significant oversight of how day schools are spending money. And I say that because we've seen day schools fail at this tremendously high rate in Toronto. We saw every non-Orthodox day school except for one just north of the city close, like Domino's. And I think we've seen some really poor spending decisions by schools and very poor forecasting and all that sophistication. It's not there. So I would be, and I think we do pay a tax. We already pay a tax if we pay money into Federation. I feel like that is my Jewish tax that I pay if I'm supporting Federation in my city, or if I'm sending, doing it directly to day schools. So I think before I would like to see a tax, I would like to see some very serious outside professional oversight of how day schools are functioning and being as lean as and yet still offering what we want. We still want support for special education, and we still want arts programming and everything else that we would think is a frill. And I don't think we all wouldn't say it's a frill, but I know some people would say it's a frill. So we want to keep all the great stuff, but I think I would still want to see some really serious oversight of how schools are managing their money before I would be before I'm looking at a across the board tax. And further, Avi, I don't think that you need to go to day school to be a Jewish communal leader. As I said at the very outset, in my family, that's not true. And if we look at who's at Federation, so I don't think we support, I guess the question is, why do we support day school at all? And I don't think we support it because it makes Jewish leaders, and I don't think we support it because it makes people marry Jewish people. I think we support it because we want people to have a strong Jewish identity of their own.
I agree.
But I think, and I was thinking a lot about this since I heard the pod on the interfaith marriage. I think that we have to look at institutions not at promoting marriage within Judaism, but understanding that we want to create individuals who are going to be allied with Israel or with their Jewish life in some way. But I think we need to also reevaluate some of the values of what we want our day schools to actually do.
Interesting. So to wrap things up, because we've been going all over the place, maybe a bit of good news or something that's really a little bit positive. What are the alternatives to day school that you guys have seen that you think are actually working, that are actually a viable alternative, something that's valuable and has an ability for us to say, well, if you're not going to do this, then maybe do that or make it better? Yoni, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, making your home Jewish in all sorts of ways is really an important start. I think supplementary Jewish school gets a bad rap, probably because sort of in the same way, reverse way that some of us are talking about day school now. You know, like our parents or grandparents, they went to cheder maybe a couple of times a week, and they didn't want to replicate that experience for their children or grandchildren either. So I think maybe supplementary school has kind of come back around and employs a little bit more rigorous education and Judaism as well. So I think a lot can be done with that. And if you do enough stuff at home, also find one of the many cultural events that are Jewish cultural events that are always happening, at least in Toronto and Montreal. I think there are good ways to do Jewish education formally and informally that may not be tied to day school. Having said all that, when my kids are getting ready for high school, I think I'm leaning to sending them to a Jewish high school. So all bets are off in like another 3 to 4 years.
I'm glad to see that I have it's not just me that believes that elementary school, high school, yay, right? But it's part of this discussion, but I think we're going to wrap it up now. Michael, what do you think?
Oh my God, when you said that on the pod, like at some point before, I took like a very deep breath and was like, yes, Rabbi Avi thinks that I am taking the correct path.
Okay, Michael, what do you think? What have you seen that's working? What's your alternative to?
My alternative is my house. Strangely, I had no role in this, but some of my son's favorite books that he always brings to me and wants to read are like the Passover book, the Light the Menorah book, where you like pull up the flap thing inside and the candles like light up in the book, whatever. Like he loves these Jewish books.
Michael, your kid's going to become a Haredi rabbi. Right? And it's
but no, I mean honestly, like there are some Hebrew words, and we'll read like the whatever the Haggadah like kids version, and he repeats after me in Hebrew and stuff like that. I'm a big proponent of not relying on the institution and just the parents, taking it into your own hands. If you want your kid to turn out a certain way, then it's up to you as a parent, and don't rely on other people. Don't leave it up to them. And this way I can, but I'm also a control freak. So
I would agree that, the home is obviously the most formative place for our kids, and it's where we're really lucky that Judaism is such a home-based religion with Shabbat and Sukkot and seders, and so we're so lucky that we can. I think it's absolutely the place. I think there's a real place for Jewish summer camp, which we've been involved with, and I've seen my kids make Jewish friends, gain some Jewish skills. I've seen some of my kids have been on staff. All my kids have gone to Israel with some kind of a summer camp experience, which I think was really valuable for all of them. And I've also seen probably the biggest value was actually seeing some of my kids become on staff, and being able to be role models and having people point out to them how valuable it is that at 17 that they can be a role model and they can reflect back on when they were, little guys and they saw their favorite staff. And I think that can only happen at summer camp. It doesn't get to happen anywhere else. And I think that's just, you can't measure that. If I only had money to afford either camp or school, I might even pick camp and try and supplement it with school, because camp is immersive in a way that school isn't. But I think ideally you can do them both, and they complement each other really nicely.
Excellent. David, what's your prescription?
Well, Lila brought this up earlier in terms of what she felt was missing in Jewish day school was spirituality. And I really agree with that assessment. I think a lot of the things that have meant the most to me in my Jewish upbringing and experience is when a teacher or a rabbi has brought this element in. A lot of the times, my mom would always explain growing up in the 50s and the 60s that one thing that she always felt that when she went to her Jewish Saturday school was that these are the rules that we are prescribed to follow by the Torah and by God, do them. As opposed to, I think what really had an awakening for her was when she learned about Musar, when she learned about Kabbalah, when she learned about these things that were always kept secret or hidden or just not known by the larger Jewish community. I think these are things that can really have a lot of tremendous value for people, especially younger people that are maybe seeking things with deeper values.
Lila said everything that I was going to say. Couldn't have said it better myself. The interesting thing, having gone to a religious camp, a modern Orthodox camp, I had friends that came towards the later end of the years, like going into counselor and training and then staff, who I was shocked wanted to come to my camp, because everyone that went to my camp for the most part was observant at home. And then you would get some of these kids who just heard great things about the camp experience. And they would go to camp and do Shabbat for the first time, and they loved it. And they came back later than, I stopped going to camp after my first year staff because I started doing plays during the summer, and they stayed for an extra couple summers. And that was probably the most immersive, religious, positive Jewish experience that they ever had. Do they keep Shabbat now? No. But I'm sure that probably affected them in a way that their school education landed, I would imagine.
So, I was going to say a lot of what everybody's saying here. I want to take it one step further, try to bring it all together. I would go so far as to say that if you are a parent, the same way you have a responsibility to change your kids' diapers and feed them and make sure they get the basic necessities. If part of those basic necessities is a robust education, and if you care about your life as a Jew, you have a responsibility to take an active role in that. And I'll start with the negative, but then move to the positive. The biggest mistakes that we see, that I see, that happen within the Jewish day school system, or just within Jewish schooling in general, is when parents basically outsource their Judaism to the schools. It's what you were saying at the very beginning. If it's not being lived at home, it's not going to matter how wonderful it is in school, right? There's a problem there. So we have to flip that switch to say, if you care about it, then find the school that most closely aligns with who you are. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a day school. It could be a French immersion school. It could be a public school. It could be a very nice private school. But then figure out what most closely aligns, and then have a responsibility to fill out the holes, not to go and say, well, that's the closest, that's what it is, and then whatever happens between 8 a.m. and whatever school ends, because it's 4:45 here in Quebec because of a triple curriculum, whatever time that might be, I don't even want to think about it. Homework, go to your room, do your homework. It's taking the active interest in either supplementing your kid's social life by giving them after school programs that have non-Jews if they're in a Jewish day school, or vice versa, figuring out what Jewish life looks like in your home, living it, and then being able to teach them or finding the right program that will teach them that, and then adding in the camp, adding in the, whatever else, the synagogue life, adding in the spirituality if the school has everything but the spirituality. You have just as much responsibility to find it, because there is no such thing as a perfect school. There's literally no perfect school, because even if you find the school that is perfect for you, you will not want your kid to be in a school with a bunch of other kids that are exactly perfectly aligned like that. You want that diversity. So even if you find the perfect school, you're going to find that you have a lack of diversity. There is no perfect school. Find the school that is closest to what you care about, and then make it more perfect with your active interest. And I think that apathy of like, I'm done with my kids. I've fed them. I've watched Yo Gabba Gabba ad infinitum. I've listened to too much Coco Melon, and I'm done. It's time for the school to take care of it. It's, that to me is the biggest tragedy, and we have to change that, and we can fix that. If we can fix that, then that will, do a lot.
That's great advice. I'm going to keep that in mind and listen back to this when I have children, and who knows how many years.
Excellent. Lila, Yoni, Michael, it's been wonderful. Thank you for coming on the show. We'll hopefully have you back for many other topics. Maybe we'll reconvene this in a year from now and see what we've learned over the past year for a back to school. But in the meantime, thank you for joining Bonjour Chai. As always, it's not just about what we think. We would love to hear what you thought. Email us at bonjour@thecjn.ca to let us know what you thought. Now it's time in a show where we like to talk about our nachas, the thing that made us feel good this week, the thing that brought us some joy, something Jewish, something Canadian-ish, maybe sometimes. Alana, what's your nachas this week?
So this nachas is very, very fitting for the episode. It is the 75th anniversary of my sleepaway camp, Camp Masad, in the Laurentians, right above Montreal. They had a big event for it, which sadly I was not able to attend, but it was a big anniversary reunion where they kind of relived camp for the day. So they had people that went to the camp from its early days and people that are going to the camp now, and they sang songs and, did flagpole and all the things that you do at camp. Every single year since I stopped being a staff, I keep saying that I want to go up there and go for a Shabbat, because they let alumni come up and teach like a little program for the teens or read a book to the kids, and then you get to stay at camp. I haven't done it yet. Maybe next year. Every year things just keep popping up because I'm self-employed and there's never a good time to do anything. But I miss my camp very much.
If university doesn't work out for you, Alana, I think there's a job opening at this Jewish summer camp.
Yeah, I would love to get paid minimum wage again. Who doesn't?
Awesome. Excellent. David, what's your nachas this week?
This past week, JAC, which stands for Jewish Adult Calgary, held its first, finally, event of the year. They are out and they are about and they are having a great time. We had an event called Jews and Brews. It took place at Cold Brewing in Inglewood, Calgary. You know what? I met a lot of Calgarian Jews who I didn't even know existed before this week. Some were even from interfaith.
You couldn't have done a wine and cheese and call it Jews for Cheeses?
You know what? I'm going to take that idea, bring it back to the committee, and it might be next month's event.
I hope so.
I was just going to say, though, that there are a lot of these kids who are like, basically it ranges from 18 to 40. Jack, that's who we foster and look after. Some of these came from interfaith families. And I think Rabbi Bregman, who we had on a couple of weeks ago for the Interfaith podcast, he'd be surprised to know that all of them felt very deeply connected to their Jewish roots, even if he would consider them nothing but a mishmash. Avi, what is your nachas?
So I have a two-part nachas.
Of course.
Well, they're actually very much related to each other.
Okay.
There was an article that came out a couple days ago by Kat Romano, which is entitled "An Elegy for Liberté Cream Cheese," a Montreal bagel schmear like no other.
This is not where I thought your nachas was going.
Apparently, Liberty cream cheese, which was the staple of Jewish cream cheese, and there's a whole history behind why it's called Liberty, and it was a Jewish company, and it's not anymore, but they've stopped making Liberty cream cheese. So a little bit of sadness for that. Were you guys Liberty cream cheese people?
Yeah.
So
I
That's
didn't
done.
know that it's done, and I didn't know it was Jewish.
But
Oh well.
it ties into this thing that I purchased this week. I'm not, you guys know me, I'm not such a hoodie wearer.
No.
Maybe around the house once in a while, but I found this hoodie and I absolutely had to own it. Can you describe for us, Alana, what this hoodie looks like?
That's funny. So it's a gray hoodie with very Judaica style text that says Marc Jacobs.
Like
but
Marc Jacobs, the designer.
like the
It's actually
designer?
it's his. It's not a bootleg.
but the O is a bagel.
It's the Saint Viator bagel.
The Saint Viator bagel with a little hat. My eyes are really
You don't
bad.
have to say with a little hat. It's just
it's
the Saint Viator bagel.
Yo, yeah, you're right. I have really bad eyesight. And then it says famously better since 1984.
So not only that, right? So I had to own this hoodie because it has the Saint Viator bagel logo like stolen in there. This is a collaboration with Marc Jacobs and another designer apparently. And
hilarious.
what is the name of the designer?
Avi Gold. That's amazing. That's
So-
serendipity right there.
So I happen to have I don't know if you can see it there, David. Well, whatever. That is my that is my new hoodie that is referencing Montreal bagels in a very interesting way by somebody whose name is almost mine. That is my real nachas of the week, just as much as with Kat. Kat's a wonderful article. Go check it out. I think it's in the Nasher. But that's my nachas of the week. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending August 26th. Our producer is Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcasts is Michael Fraiman. Our music is by So Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a comment or rating on the platform of your choice, and even better, if you can just tell a friend that they might like. If you can just tell a friend about Bonjour Chai so that they can join the Frozen Chosen, that would be great. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Ilana Zakon.
And I'm David Squire.
You want to read this book with me? I'll read the Passover Seder. Okay, well, we're going to skip straight to the Haggadah part, because this is the part that you do that's very cute. You ready? Kadesh. Urchatz. Karpas. Yachatz. Good job. Magid. Rachza. Motzi matzah. Maror. Korech. Shulchan orech. Yeah, that one's pretty hard. Tzafun. Barech. Halel. Perfect. Nirtza. Good job.